Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a new product announcement video for the new ECA 3D printed 1/6 scale and M250 cal conversion sets and the new ECA 3D printed D90210 Pedestal base. All the components in this video are listed on the ECA catalog pages, and the direct link can be found in the video description listed below. As for the setup that we have here, this was built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This setup over here, just like with all the other ECA Browning parts, are intended for use on the Dragon 1/6 scale M2HB model kit or the Dragon fully built version of the M2HB that has been on the market for a number of years. In addition to the Dragon setup, this setup will also be compatible with the ZY Toys version of the Browning M2HB that has also been recently reintroduced on the market and has been floating around now for a couple of years at this point. Even though these sets here are solely intended for use on the Dragon M2HB, they may be able to be utilized on several other makes of 1/6 scale Browning options, be it from 21st Century Toys and Hasbro. Those units are somewhat similar in dimensions to the Dragon counterpart, so they may be backwards compatible, more or less. However, having said that, these sets are solely intended for use on the Dragon units. In this video, we're going to be going over the 3D printed components that are used to bring the model up to the condition that we have here, and we're also going to be going over the assembly and construction of the various units in order to get the setup that you see presently. Because of this, there's going to be a ton of really cool info coming right at you, so just sit back and enjoy. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this here is the Browning AN M250 cal mounted on a D90210 Pedestal base. The Browning M2 system is a legendary HMG, and it's one that has been in constant service with the US military and abroad since the 1920s. The thing has creeped over the 100-year mark, and this thing has no signs of stopping. However, most people, when they think of the Browning M2, they think of the M2HB. That is the heavy barrel version of the 50 cal. However, there are several other versions out there, from water-cooled versions to other air-cooled versions, and this one being one of them. This, of course, is the AN M250. The lineage of the system goes back to the 1930s for use in aircraft, where they were looking to have an armament that had a very high rate of fire, but also one that was equally lightweight. And this was done with the original AN-M2. This was a system similar to what we see with the Browning 30 cals, but was much lighter and again had a much higher rate of fire. And although these did work and they were used to great effect on airplanes, the problem was the limitation of the 30 caliber round, where you don't exactly have a whole lot of time to be on target with an airplane, and just the damage payload of a 50 cal round is something that's much more appreciated compared to just poking a bunch of small 30 cal holes into something. So the designers went ahead and came up with the system that we have here. Essentially, the AN-M250 recycles the 50 cal receiver from the M2 and changes the front end, where the heavyweight thick barrel is replaced with a thinner barrel and is one that is fully jacketed, much along the lines of the 1919. The idea of having the thinner barrels, because of the unit being mounted in the sky, the slipstream of the airplane is more than enough to keep the barrel nice and cool and prevent it from overheating. AN-M250s were mounted in all of the famous aircraft from World War II, from the P-38 Lightning to the P-51 Mustang, but in addition to being used by the Air Corps, it was also widely utilized by the US Navy and also the US Army for other applications. One advantage about the AN-M250's front end was with the locking collar. This did two functions. First, it secured the unit to the receiver, but the other thing was that it offered another mounting point to secure the weapon to any other type of mounts. Generally, the mounts that are used to hold the M2 in place are very heavy and chunky, and although for ground use it's perfectly fine, for something like airplane use, or if you're looking for something with a lower profile because space is a luxury, i.e. like on a submarine, these larger units were less than ideal. So this new unit, or I should say the new locking collar design, allowed it to be mounted to some very lightweight and low profile mounts that were suitable for those other applications. The A&M 250 is still with us today, but it got redesignated the M3, and with some modifications made to that unit, it bumped up the rate of fire, and you'll still see units similar to this today mounted on things like helicopters. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter condition of all these parts were at the beginning of the project. And here are the project parts at the start of the build. What we have here on the table are a mix of 3D printed components, as well as also some older parts that are made out of cast resin. We also have a mix of some items that are not available on the catalog or for sale, and the other items are or have been the topics of other videos that have been posted on this channel in the past, with the exception of the pedestal base over here, as this is something that's really new and something I'm eagerly awaiting to mention. But moving from the right and working our way to the left takes us to the cast resin parts. The cast resin components here are all the parts to assemble the Browning M2 receiver. As for what these parts are, these are not something that are listed on the ECA catalog. These here are only used for my own personal use for my builds, and what these are direct resin copies of the Dragon 1/6 scale M2 HB kit that was released about 10, at this point, even more years ago. So, rewind our clocks back to the early 2010s, Dragon were releasing their 1/6 scale models as a unassembled kit form, and some of the units that they were assembling were, or I should say releasing, were their weapon sets, and one in particular, which was awesome, was their M2 HB. Of all of the 50 cals out there in 1/6 scale, the Dragon M2 HB is by far the best. And at the time, they were readily available, they were fairly affordable, so they were something that a lot of builders out there, myself included, would stock up on. Well, I figured that wasn't really a good long-term solution, so what I went ahead and did was I picked up one of the kits, and before I assembled it and used it on a project, I went ahead and made a mold of all of the relevant parts. Since I tend to need a lot of Brownings, it would be great to have a plentiful source available, because the Dragons aren't going to be on the market forever, and sadly they aren't. So here we have the cast resin parts. These ones here are a direct copy of the plastic tooling. I just simply made a mold of them, and I use them for my various builds, either for full tank builds for my own collection, or like these ones here when I'm building the pedestal bases and testing out the new cradle mounts and things like that. The Dragon clones are absolutely perfect. On a similar note, all of the ECA cradle and MG sets that are out there are intended for use on the Dragon spec MGs. The Dragon MGs are still out there, they're floating around in one way, shape, or form or another, but also a lot of people don't realize that the ZY Toys release of the M2 HB is actually the Dragon kit. It's just being produced by ZY Toys, either illicitly or they just acquired the molds. One way or another, it's the Dragon tooling, which is awesome because the ZY set is still fairly available, still fairly affordable, and again, in my opinion, the ZY/Dragon tooling is the best rendition of an M2 HB in 1/6 scale. However, that could be a topic of its own video, and maybe I'll make one at some point in time, but this now brings us to the 3D printed parts that we have here. Starting to the right again and working our way to the left takes us to the cradle mount. The cradle mount that you see here is a 3D printed set that's listed on the EastCoastArmory.com catalog page, and this set is one of many that I do offer, and it is a 3050 mount. And what's really cool about these sets is that you have the ability to either mount on an M2 HB or a Browning M1919. And on the other videos in the past, I've talked about this topic in more depth. You see both of those options being fitted in place, be it, again, the Browning 19 or the M2. Here is actually a misprint, which is why I'm using it for my own personal use, and it's definitely not something that is suitable for production. Here you see the ammo tray portion. Everything looks great, with the exception of this area over here, which has a large hole in this area, and this is definitely not correct. And it's because of this issue over here, which is why this one is not up to snuff and is not going to be suitable for commission, or I should say for the general sales. However, for my own personal use, this is perfect because I could go ahead and correct and make the adjustments required to fix this thing up. So this is definitely something that is far from being something that's going to be being tossed into the trash. And in this video, I will go over the repair method that I'm going to use to fix this up. As for what the unit looks like that is ready for shipping, well, that would be this one here. This one is straight from the printer, and this one is a production part and is definitely one that meets quality control. So you get to see the inside portion over here where we have these square cutouts, and as I mentioned in the other video, these square cutouts are there for a reason, not just for drainage of water if any gets into this area over here, but they're actually used to mount on either an M2 50 cal ammo can or a smaller M1919 30 cal ammo can. With the way these stamps are, the 30 cal ammo can just slides into this section over here, and these little crimp sections actually secure the smaller can in place. Of course, I go into more depth in that in the other video, but here you get to see why this unit here is not one that passed quality control. As I always say in these videos, the ones that, all of the detail components that go out to customers are the best that the printer or the resin castings can possibly muster. So again, this is partially why I always do QC checks on all of my orders and prints. Another thing to point out is the material. Originally, if you look on those other videos, the sets were produced out of an SLS printed nylon material, and regrettably, the outfit that I used to do my 3D prints, they are no longer in existence. They sadly went bankrupt, so I had to find an alternate source for my 3D prints that not only is able to produce my parts with the complexities that they have, but produce them in a quality that is either on par or better than the previous vendor, and also in a way that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And this is something that took some research and investigating. However, I believe I have found the replacement vendor here, and it's probably for the best because these prints are absolutely awesome. The difference is that unlike the previous method where it was an SLS nylon, the new material here is actually a resin, so it's technically an HD 3D print, and that means you're going to have some excellent surface quality on the pieces. However, this does come at the expense as this material is more frail compared to the SLS white nylon, but either way, for the application that we have here, which is just a detail component, the switch in material should be more than adequate. If another printing operation resets up production that utilizes the exact same machines and quality as the other parts and are able to print all my files, I'll gladly be able to switch production back to them, but for the time being, this vendor here seems to be a fantastic choice, and I'm definitely really excited with using them for more prints in the future, for both production as well as also for personal use. Of course, what you see here are just the 3D printed parts. There are components such as metal chain, as well as other plastic rods that are needed to finalize the set, and of course I will be adding these to this sets here as they enter into production, and also of course the actual production sets that go out to customers, like that other piece I just mentioned was and is, will also get the exact same metal parts as well to finish off the set. But enough with that. This now leads us to this section where we have here another somewhat older, it's actually a newer released item, but it's one that has been on the catalog now for about a year or so, and that is the AN M2 50 conversion set. And what this is, this replaces the front end section of a Browning M2 HB, specifically the Dragon set, where instead of having the air-cooled section with the ventilated section and the exposed barrel, this one here is the A&M2, which essentially is nothing more than a bigger version of the type of barrel shroud that we would see on a Browning M1919. This was also the subject matter of another video. This is a older print. This material is not used anymore. Either it hasn't been used by the other vendor I recently closed down for a little while, so it kind of dates this piece. However, the CAD file is still the same, and the production ones are going to be made with the same material that you see on these other parts that we have here on the table. Outside of that, they are exactly the same. The collar has its full detailing on it. You can see that it has a little step to it with its wrench slits right there once the camera zooms in. On either side here and here. The zoom is really not doing me any favors, but up there we go. So it has those details in place. It has this milled in slot right over here on the top section. We have the correct number of holes on the shroud itself, in the correct size no less. The front bushing section is appropriately detailed, and the barrel is also printed hollow through and through. The barrel itself does have its inner detailing present, and because the unit is a two-piece print, I mean where the shroud and the inner barrel are not touching each other on the CAD file or on the print itself. It is just like the real one, where if you hold the thing in a certain light, you can actually see right through, just like it is on the real unit. Like I said before, this is designed to plug into the standard Dragon M2 receiver, and you'll see what that looks like as this video goes on. And this brings us to the coolest aspect of this project, outside of the A&M2 barrel, of course. I love A&M250s. Thanks to Kelly's Heroes, but back to the set here is the pedestal base. And this is a really cool piece of equipment that I've been wanting to bring on this channel now. It's been on my to-do list for long enough, and finally I have the opportunity to do it. This is the US D90210 Pedestal base. Really catchy name, specifically if you grew up in the 90s, but that's for reasons outside of this here. The 90210 base is a pedestal base that was very distinctive in its shape and was very much a departure compared to the other pedestal bases that were seen on other American AMV from the period. Most notably are the other ones found on the ECA catalog that have been brought on this channel in the past on other videos. Most notably, I'm referring to the M31 series, where there are several flavors of them available on the ECA catalog, with being legless, with the one support leg, and the coolest one, the M31C, which has the 3 legs that come out and bolt to the vehicle that the thing is mounted to. Well, this one here is of a slightly different design. This one here is very different because instead of it being that tube type structure, it has a large conical type shape to it, which already gives it a very unique look. In addition to the conical shape, this one has a lot of cool bells and whistles on it, such as the little tie-down straps that we have right here on this side, which are used to strap down, I believe, a spare barrel or other pieces of equipment that are intended for the M2. The detailing is all there, including not just the handle itself, but also little mounting fasteners that we see on the bottom feet. Also, you'll notice that all of the details I'm about to mention are integrally printed on as a single printing, so no gluing or affixing is required for these parts here. You're basically good to go from the get-go. This is true also for not just the handles, like I said before, but also for the little bracket that we have right here. Which, by the way, the bracket is for the travel lock that secures, that when it's deployed, locks into this little section here of the cradle, and all the other cradles that are used, be it this one or the other various patterns, but it'll lock into the travel lock section, and it locks the 50 in place, preventing from pivoting around when the vehicle's in operation, which obviously for a vehicle mount is fairly important. Even though the unit also does have several travel locks already built in, but we'll go into that in more depth in a moment. So the travel lock is supplied. It's all fully detailed. And we also have the fastener that's used to pin this thing in place, and this thing can pivot up and down when it's assembled. In addition to the bracket, we also have here the coolest part, and that is the rabbit ear clamp system. This is literally the exact same type of clamp that we see on the storage rack section on the back of American tanks, where on those vehicles, when you want to store the M2, the barrel gets removed from the receiver and it gets clamped into a rack system on the back portion, generally on the turret. And this little rabbit ear type design is how the unit clips in place. We have this large retention bracket over here with this spring steel bracket bent in the shape of a rabbit ears, and the piece just slips in, thus holding in place with spring tension. These clips here I also offer and produce for the various tanks, be it the Sherman or the Pershing, and those can be found in both metal and resin on the ECA catalog. But it's cool that this exact same design is used on this system over here, but instead of it being used for a barrel, it's used to secure and house the travel lock, preventing this from flopping around when the vehicle is also in operation. All of the details outside of the feet that have their little fasteners integrally printed on have their weld-bead details integrally printed on as well. And you can see that right over here. And you can also see it on the bottom mounting plate that also has its perforations for the fasteners that are used to secure this thing in place. Now, the fasteners are not supplied with this set here. That's something that you would have to acquire as an aftermarket. Get metal fasteners of one flavor or another. However, the unit is fastener ready, as you can see. And if you look on the top portion, hopefully this comes out in camera at this color, or before the thing gets painted, there is a weld bead that runs along the bottom section here, and it just gives it for the appropriate complete detailing look that you see presently. The welds, by the way, are also found on the travel lock bar and are on the bottom portion here of each of the brackets. For the rabbit ear clamp, this is riveted in place as would be on the real unit, and you can see that detailing there. On the top portion, the taper actually, I should say the cone stops over here, and then it becomes a straight cylinder, and then it tapers again over here where we have a locking bar mechanism right there. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this may be able to extend, but I'm a little hazy on that. If I was to take a guess, though, I think it would. Then we have the top pintle section. This is basically the socket that we tend to see on the other cradle mounts that are found on American tanks, also on the ECA catalog, but slightly different with its design, with the way we have this tensioning section that we have here. Of course, we have this T-handle unit, which on the real one would use to tighten and loosen this section, which would clamp onto the bottom pintle section over here on the mount, and will allow it to stay in place. Actually, come to think of it, I think I'm mistaken when I said the whole thing can elevate. What I believe what we have here is this section is actually what's used to lock the unit in place over here, and this unit here might act as another type of travel lock. I'm a little hazy on the subject, haven't really seen one of these in person, but if anyone has, be sure to put that in the comment section below. For the detailing here, I got it from the Secondary Mounts book, which has been basically a Bible for me for designing all of these parts that you see, including the cradles and the various MG parts that are on the ECA catalog. And thanks to that book over there, I was able to design the set that we have presently. But either way, if it's on the real one, it's going to be on this one. As for the piece, it is printed hollow and it's ready to go. So here we have the yoke section, and as you can see, it just plugs directly in place. No modifications or drilling or any other type of mods are necessary to get this thing to fit in place. You literally just slip it in and you are good to go from the get-go. One last thing I want to mention about this mount is that it's very unique because this is generally seen on the M21 version of the American M3 half-track. For those who don't know, that's the version of the half-track that has the mortar built into it. And if anyone has built the old school Tamiya one, you'll know and remember this large conical type base that gets glued in place in the fighting compartment. The set itself is printed on the exact same resin components that the other parts that have been mentioned before are produced in. And this one, I don't see that changing even if I find another supplier of the SLS, because again of just how excellent the surface quality is. And it just looks like such a high quality part that this one here looks like it's good to go in this format, or at least for the time being, unless something happens to my producer and I'm back to square one trying to find another one. So if you're watching these videos and you're thinking about ordering parts, you might want to do so sooner than later, because you never know what happens with the producers of parts. A lot of times my vendors end up closing or things happen and I gotta find an alternate. So for the time being, this is the vendor I'm using, and this stuff is really good quality. So the first thing we're going to do is get the cradle assembled. And the cradle itself goes together extremely quickly. And if it wasn't for this little mishap here with the print, the thing would have been together and fully fleshed out already at this point. But needless to say, we have to go a little bit with a few extra steps because of the circumstances that we have. Aside from that, the cradle with the new material is assembling just like the old one, although you do have to do some slight more hand fitting in regards to the pins here on this section, as this material is a much more frail compared to the original SLS material that I was making these in the past. So all this means is that you just have to slightly widen the holes here with a small Dremel bit. Once the appropriate material is removed, the unit then will plug into place as designed. Just like so. As for the main pivot pins, these dropped in basically without any sort of fiddling whatsoever. Once they are fitted in place, you add the glue to the appropriate location, locking the cradle as one, and as you can see, the piece is fully hinged and articulated as designed. As for this piece here, I think I will actually paint it off of the unit, just so that this allows me to get thorough access to all these locations here for the paint and prime work, and it'll prevent any sort of complications with missed paint areas. Then once everything is done, it'll then just slip on for final assembly. For the tray itself, this still slips into place, as you can see, without any sort of problems. This one, I did have to do just some slight hand fitting on the rails, just to open the tolerance ever so slightly. With the original one, with the SLS, it was much more, I don't want to say forgiving, but it was a bit more accommodating for the piece to slide in place without causing any sort of issues. And although that's still possible with this new material over here, I just feel it's a bit just err on the side of caution, just to go ahead and do some slight just polishing on the rail sections, just so that when the piece slides in place, it will slide in place without any sort of hiccups or hang-ups whatsoever, as you can see here. Once the unit gets painted and there's a layer of primer paint built up, this should still slide in okay, and if anything, I'm just hedging myself for those extra tolerances. So this brings us directly to the tray. As you can see, I went ahead and marked the area with a Sharpie that needs to be amputated so that I could go ahead and rebuild these sections. And to do the removal process, I have here a micro router bit. These bits here I pick up from my usual vendor, which can be found in the video description listed below. As for what they are, well, there's the vendor, but also you can see the size here of the unit in question, with the SKU number and all that good stuff. I absolutely love these router bits, and I always use them, or I should say they're always not too far away from bench whenever I need to do any sort of procedure like this. And again, the vendor's awesome. I always recommend buying from him. So I have the pilot holes drilled out, or more or less drilled out. I'm going to add a few more just for extra sake. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and just cut away. Alright, so the piece amputated out very nicely. The 3D printed material is much more forgiving compared to some of the other 3D printed resin that I've handled in the past, either from the other manufacturer or also from some of the other 3D printed resin kits that I've also assembled and posted on this channel in the past, and also more to come. Stay tuned for that. But aside from that, yeah, the material was easily removed. And from here, I could just go ahead and carefully square everything off appropriately with some needle files. The material also files pretty easily too. It kind of has a feel almost like polystyrene, which is quite amazing. That turned out quite well. So the next thing to do is to repair and replace the cruciform section that was amputated out, or that was non-existent. So here I have just some strips of evergreen plastic strip, and I doubled them up because this will equal the thickness of the part here in question. So I'm going to first start by gluing the center portion in like this, and then once I have the center portion lined up and the glue set, I can then go ahead and add the two last missing sections, thus completing the cruciform shape. At that point there, once all the glues are fully set and dry, I can take a little drop of thick super glue, add it to the appropriate locations on the inside and the out, and then I can polish everything down, leading for a seamless appearance. At that point there, the tray here is fully repaired. So after a few passes off camera with some sandpaper, I was able to polish away the seams where the new sections were mounted in place. The sandpaper I'm using is just 220 grit right here, And I didn't even need to use the wet sanding. Now I am going to go ahead and get this thing a shot of flat black primer just so I know that there aren't any surprises. But so far from what I can tell, everything looks to be polished up quite well. Sanding the bottom, really easily done. I just go ahead and just go up and down these surfaces over here, and then this gradually just polishes down everything nice and smooth. For the inside, you need to use a little bit more tact. So I use that trick that I've mentioned in a few other videos where I have a small plier like this, and I take some sandpaper, like so, and I basically just scrub the sections that I can get access to. I think I was able to do a pretty good job with the removal process, but you know what? Like I said before, I'm not going to know if there's any surprises, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the thing with a shot of flat black spray paint. And with the unit in its shot of primer, as you can see, or as you can't see, there are no seams whatsoever, and the thing looks absolutely flawless. If I hold this up to the light, you let the camera zoom in, you will not be able to see any trace whatsoever of the repair job that I had to have done. And same is also true, most importantly, for the inside. And for the most part, this thing is ready for the next step. So at this point, you can see that I've been prepping the belt tensioner sections, and these were just simply snipped off of the sprue with a clean cut snips, and I'm just going through the process of deburring them. And one thing about this material, unlike the nylon that the pieces were made in previously, these pieces act much like I may have mentioned before, a standard polystyrene model kit. So such techniques with the use of a needle file or sandpaper, even something along those lines, are more than enough to polish down any sort of burrs on them. And on the nylon, it just wasn't the case. You could hit it all day with a needle file, and it's just going to hold up very well to wear, which is awesome for some certain applications, definitely. But for something just a detail piece, it's something that, well, you can easily work with because you use a knife to clean off, and I still love that material. But this stuff here really does emulate much along the lines of standard injection molded plastic. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and just polish away some of the burr remnants that were on. This piece was connected to the sprue in these two sections and one in the rear over here. There's the sprue remnant right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and polish that guy down. And now there's one right over here. As you can see, it polishes away very, very quickly. Again, what we're used to seeing on standard plastic injection molded model kits. Alright, so with this basically cleaned up, there's a little bit of deburring left to do. I'll take care of that. Lickety split. Okay, with that out of the way, it's now time for the assembly. And in order to hook this up in place, there are metal pins that get inserted into the hinge sections. In addition to the pins, we also have the springs that we have here. These are custom made and are supplied with the ECA cradles. And yes, they are handmade. I kind of have a groove with spitting these things out. And these here are for the use of both detailing as well as also functionality. They do have some functionality to them, and you'll see that in a second. At this point here, the cradle is actually fully completed, and it's ready to slide off into paint. The last thing needed, of course, are the retention pins, but these get added after everything is painted and weathered. The other thing you'll see that's fit at this time is this rear adapter chunk, and this here is what adapts the piece to fit either the Browning M2HB or Browning M1919, and of course I go into that in more depth in the other videos. Depending on which one you're mounting depends on the orientation on how this thing is mounted in place. This one right now is configured for the mounting of a Browning M2. So with the cradle all set, it's now time to work on the MG itself. And here we have the A&M 250 going through its final assembly. For the unit itself, the receiver is just standard M2, so there's nothing going on here. This is essentially the stock version of what would normally be the Dragon or the ZY Toys variant of this weapon. On the front here, I did have to enlarge the hole so that the ECA piece can fit in place. Really easily done with a Dremel. And I also shortened it slightly on this section here. Perhaps it's something I could revisit, but for now it seems to work okay. And at this point here, this unit is just going to get glued in place like you see presently. The other thing to mention about the M2 is that at this time you can see that the top cover does open up. The charging handle does work. I did not put a spring in this one. In the past, I have put springs on the inside. However, I always found that once that's added, because the pieces are resin, not plastic, it tends to be a bit more frail, and what will happen is that you'll bust the charging handle before the piece will actually charge. So for this one here, I just left it without the spring in place, which is actually how the stock Dragon kit is. The spring is something that I always add extra, and it was something that Dragon added on their pre-built version of the same unit. Go figure. The ladder sight and peep sight system is fully functional. You can see I drilled out the peep sight right there. This is done with a small Dremel bit. This is molded solid, and the piece can still function. And on these M2s and the 1919s the same way, when it's down, it's an aperture, and when you flip it up, it becomes a ladder sight. And that detailing was brought over into this unit here, and in order to make this function, what I do is that I just drill out the ladder sight itself, and I use a small sewing pin in order to achieve the pinning. With the way the stock kit is, and again, the same is true for the ZWWII Toys one, the piece is solid plastic and just pins in, and just clips in place. Problem is, those little nubs wear out pretty quickly, and the piece ends up falling off. Same thing is also true for the top cover. The stock one, it just plugs in place. Matter of fact, I have another example here for another project that I'm working on, which will probably make its debut sooner than later. Hint, hint. But you can see this one here is stock with the nubs integrally molded on still. And what I always do is I drill them out with a pin vise, and then I use a small wire brad here to achieve the hinge. And as you can see, the wire brad is much more secure and a lot more efficient at doing this hinging compared to the stock original. So that's something you can keep in mind if you have the Dragon kit. And that's all there is to that. Oh, the other thing to mention is the seam work. So when you assemble one of these kits, you will have seams where the two receiver sections meet on the front, the top section here, as well as on the underside. And this is all polished away prior to the rear butterfly section being installed. As reference, here I have another receiver of a gun that's being assembled. And this one here is going through its bodywork. As you can see, I have some putty in some sections here and there. This is waiting to be dried so I can polish it down. The seam over here has some thick super glue added in place, as well as a little bit of red putty to take care of something else. And with the way these Dragon units are, is that the butterfly system is actually all made out of sub-assemblies, and once it's ready, you literally just slide it into place over here with these little rails, just like it is on the real one. So when the time comes, I'm going to add a little drop of glue to the back section over here, and then this guy here just slides directly into place, and I'm pretty sure many armors over here are going to be getting some flashbacks of that. Specifically, you may need a little like rubber mallet to help tap that thing in. But as you can see, once it slips in, it does the job quite well. To install the piece in place, I am just going to add some super glue to these locations right here. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and just drop it into the receiver section, like follows. Press it until it slips in, gets a little bite. And then once you're done, you now have an A&M 250 fully assembled. And with the unit fully assembled, you really get to see that distinctive and most interesting look of the A&M 250 in its final form. Although this unit was primarily seen on aircraft use, it did trickle its way into several other applications. Most notably, the US Navy used a bunch of these. These were the main armaments seen on the PT boats, as well as also submarines. Submarines use these to quite a great extent, where they're actually pintle mounts built into the stanchions on the side of US submarines. The Army also had a bunch of these units in use, and there are photographs of these things fitted on various vehicles. Most notably with the M4A3 E276 Jumbo, where there was a order put out to upgrade the Jumbo's armament from 75 to 76, and in addition to that, they also went ahead and replaced the standard Browning 1919 with a 50 cal. Most of the time it was an M2HB, however, there are photographs out there of upgraded Shermans from the same era with A&M 250s fitted in place. And although some people might look at the barrel shroud and say, oh, it's a 1919, not really. If you look at the front end, it may look similar to a 1919, but it's definitely more unique and distinctive, specifically if you know what you're looking for. And I'll even probably throw up a picture of one of these vehicles in theater, and you get to see the A&M 250 barrel in place. Of course, with the armament assembled and completed, let's go ahead and fit it to the cradle. So the way this thing fits to one of these cradles is with the original receiver mounts that we have here on the front and here on the back. With this little collar over here, this is actually used for mounting on several other type of mounts, namely the naval mount, like I mentioned before. Even, I believe, the bomber mount utilizes this section here as opposed to the one on the standard receiver. But, again, with the way these units are, they're very adaptable, and you could mount it many different ways. For a cradle use, though, you're keeping the one in the rear, and you're definitely keeping the one here on the front. So what that looks like in practice, I have these rib nails over here just for temporary use. And you'll see what it looks like once everything is pinned together. So once it finds that happy sweet spot, the pins just line up. This is also true for the one in the back. You want to line up the 3 holes with the swivel plate, the side plate, and the receiver mount on the bottom portion of the M2. And there you go. Once they line up accordingly, this unit is now housed in its cradle. And then, of course, for the final look, what a satisfying click, if there ever was one. So here's the unit that I could barely get in frame. And I don't know, it just looks really cool and sexy with this type of setup. I really can't wait to get this thing into paint. Which, coincidentally, is the very next step. But at least you get to appreciate everything in the white, as they say. It's also going to be a lot better when I have the appropriate pins fitted in place too. But let's get to that. Jumping forward a little bit takes us to all 3 of the components fully painted and weathered and are ready for final assembly. Starting with the cradle. It's always really cool to have these units in this condition over here before the MG gets fitted in place, because you get to really appreciate all the cool geometry and all those other subtle details that are popping out at you. The unit itself, after it was fully primed, was painted with Tamiya Olive Drab, done via the airbrush, and then I went ahead and weathered it with some double shading with some diluted Tamiya Flat Black, as well as also some Tamiya Panaline Accent to really make the thing pop. Dry brushing was then added to get the distressed edge look that we have going on here, as well as also some dry brush silver in certain areas, specifically where the belt always gets dragged across these sections when the thing is feeding. The pintle section is also left, or is painted in silver over here. It would be steel on the real unit. And generally you do not have paint on these sections over here. They need to be a smooth bearing type surface. The chains have been added. And as I mentioned in the other video, there are 2 chains per section. One chain here is used to actually pin the M2 in place, or 1919, depending on how you're rendering it. So one pin goes here, and the other pin would slide into this area over here, locking the M2 where it needs to be. The longer pin is a travel lock pin. So what you would do is you would pull it out of this nice little handy little holster over here. You would line up the unit where the holes are present, and then the pin just goes across like so. And once the thing is fitted in place, the unit is locked and can no longer elevate. Also, as I frequently mention on these sets, you have 2 options of travel lock. One is over here, and the other one is if you position it this way, and you can also pin it in the lock position in this format too. Note on the pins themselves, they have that really specific and ornate shape to them. It's kind of like a T-handle type thing. It makes it easier to grab. These are all bent out of piece of floor wire, and these actually come with the ECA sets.
in this format. The pins are also supplied as well. These are just thin little plastic rods that are pre-cut to length. The belt system is still fully functional, as you can see. There's nothing really much going on here. Oh, the units are not glued on in place, or I should say the can is not glued on in place, because it just kind of like friction fits in there. And with the layers of paint, it does a really good job keeping it in. And you know what? I am not going to mess with it. There's no need taking this thing off, so I'm just going to leave it be. But the piece actually just slides directly in place, and basically just friction and paint adhesion really does the rest. The metal chains are actually real metal chains, as one can see. And again, these are also supplied with the set. For paintwork, the entire units were spray painted with Krylon olive drab paint. It's actually a pretty good color. I use it from time to time for various projects. And then the remainder of the weathering was done via the dry brush, to get that worn, scratched seal surface that you see here. That's all there is for the cradle. And this takes us to the pedestal base. So the pedestal base obviously has been painted. The unit has been painted with my World War II shade of olive drab. It's an exterior latex house paint, applied via the airbrush, and then afterwards it was weathered with a darker shade of OD that I have, another exterior latex, and then to me a flat black was diluted, used as well. A little bit of diluted cream was applied just to get some sun fading effects. And that's really all there is to it, outside of the Tamiya panel line accent was added for the remainder of the weathering, along with some dry brushing for the paint chipping. Both with flat black, as well as also with a little bit of silver for the inside portion here of the pintle cup. Piece is still fully functional, as you can see. It still retains in that cool little clip holder that I mentioned before. The last thing to mention is the A&M 250 cal itself. And as you can see, once everything is painted and weathered, it looks absolutely awesome. Paintwork is just my usual method. Flat black spray paint for the base. And then the rest is just done with some dry brushing, done with my fan brush and a little bit of silver spray paint. And I go and get into all of the high areas, and it just really makes everything pop really nicely. On the charging handle, as well as on the main spade grips, this is painted with Tamiya Hull Red to mimic the look of the red Bakelite, which is commonly used on these units. And as I frequently say, I love the red Bakelite. It just gives the unit some nice extra color, but you do have lots of options available, from a gloss black color to wood. But me personally, I like the Bakelite. And for red Bakelite, you could roll with either Tamiya Red Brown, Tamiya Brown, or Tamiya Hull Red. There are lots of different variations of the Bakelite out there, and you can mix them up a bit, and it'll add a little bit of color contrast to your build. For this one, though, I just went with all Tamiya Hull Red in my usual format. For the shroud section, as you can see, now that everything is painted, it looks absolutely killer. All those details that I mentioned before are all popping out, including the wrench slits and all that good stuff. On the muzzle section, you'll notice that the actual tip of the barrel itself is painted in silver, and this is something that you need to do on an A&M 250. Unlike the standard unit where it's just the same parkerization or through and through, on the A&M 250, the barrel section here, because the thing is a short recoil and does have to reciprocate, the end portion of the barrel is chromed, or it's shiny like this, so that it doesn't have any friction and actually slides in and out. And this has been the case for almost all of the A&M 250s I was able to look up and see on the internet. Be it parts kits or on surviving examples on bombers, or just people have these things and they take them to shoots. Generally, whenever you see these A&M 250s, this section here is silver, so that's something to keep in mind. However, one other tip besides making it silver is that it also gives it gives the unit more color contrast, and as you can see, it just makes the thing pop all that much more. This thing here is actually ready for final installation. That side loves to keep continuing to pop up. The charging handle animation is still fully functional, as you can see. It's not like something I'm going to be playing with regularly, but it is something that does work, as well as the top feet cover. That works too.
And here's the setup now fully completed. And at this point here, it's ready to be put on display in the collection. One thing that I did notice about this setup over here is that I have to leave the receiver in the upward position like you see here because of the way the weight is distributed. If I try to go ahead and make the unit more horizontal, the thing is going to want to topple over just with the way the weight is distributed on this setup. Obviously, if the unit was bolted to a vehicle, this would definitely not be an issue. However, with the standalone setup that I have here, this is something that I do have to work around. Either way though, it does look pretty cool and the setup does look awesome in its final format. It is also a little tricky to get all in frame, but if I go ahead and give it a little bit of support, ooh, there you go, and make sure it doesn't tangle up on stuff. There you go. That's more like it. Now that is an awesome setup if I didn't say so myself. And just to show just how much different the addition of the ECA A&M2 barrel is, here we have it compared with a standard infantry variant of a Browning M2HB. This one here is pretty much what we all think of and know when we think of Browning M2s. With that distinctive short little cooling shroud section right here in the middle area. It's got that really cool carry handle. And then just the remainder of the HB setup. Now we compare and contrast that with the A&M 250. And it really is amazing just with the addition and swap out of one part, just how much drastically the thing changes. As I mentioned before, both of these units are still in service with the US military. This unit here is generally typically more commonly seen in the M3 variant, which is one that has a little bit higher rate of fire, and it's generally again seen in aircraft use. But either way, the front section is basically identical to the old World War II counterpart. And like I stated before, the Browning M2 is the antithesis of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I might as well take the opportunity to mention the other Browning 50 cal mounts that are found on the ECA catalog, as well as also the other pedestal bases. And this here is a good representation of the various different options that are available on the ECA catalog. All of the units that you see here have their own new product announcement videos where I go into each of them in more depth and the details and features that each of the units do have. And this here is really only half of the setups that I have available, because several of the mounts that you see on this table can be dual mount, where you can fit either a Browning M2 like I have here, or you can even mount on a Browning M1919 if desired. And there are several other mounts that are just dedicated purely to a Browning 1919. The Israeli mounts definitely come to mind, where they're either for a Browning 1919 or a FN mag, but that's again a topic for another video. But needless to say, if you have a 1/6 scale vehicle and you're looking for some kind of armament on it and a way to mount the armament, ECA is definitely a website you should check out. As I often mention in these videos, the American vehicles are known to be topped off with a Browning M2 of one flavor or another. And if you are building anything in any scale that's American in origin, chances are really good it's going to be rolling with a Browning somewhere on the top side. And in 1/6 scale, if you are working on a Sherman, a Stuart, any sort of soft skin type vehicle, also this is definitely going to pertain to you. And one way to enhance the build, to just make it stand out and just be a bit more flavorful compared to just a standard plain Jane build, is to do something with the MG. The MG is truly the cherry on top of the build, and if you're going with something like that, well, fortunately, when it comes to M2s and mounts, there are a lot of different options available, and that just makes the build experience just that much more pleasurable and enjoyable. with the way these things are set up, you have several different type of pedestal bases, several different type of cradle mounts, and in this case here, you even have several different flavors of the M2 itself. So if you're just working on a vehicle, say a Deuce and a Half or a Sherman or what have you, and you want to finish it off, but you want something different besides just your standard vanilla M2 HB, well, the AN M250 modification over here is a fantastic way to do just that. As we saw before with the swap out of one part, it changes the look of the unit completely and it just gives a little bit of extra flavor to the build as opposed to, again, just rolling with the standard format. And it's having all of these options available to the builder that makes working on one of these American vehicles in 1/6 scale that much more enjoyable. And with that, that wraps up this new product announcement video for the 1/6 scale ECA 3D printed AN M250 conversion and the new ECA 3D printed D90210 Pedestal base. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being new product announcement videos like the one that you just watched, or my other type of content, which would be 1/6 scale project update videos and smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have photographs of all of my builds, being smaller scale and larger scale, that get posted frequently. As well as also don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. And as I mentioned before, all of the ECA Browning sets, from cradles to change of barrels to even pedestal bases, are all listed on the ECA catalog. Again, link in the video description below. And with that, nothing much more needs to be said. Take care, and I'll see you guys all again on the next one. See you there.